Hello and welcome to this week's IGTV. Today I'm talking about nothing good happens after midnight and other things your parents used to tell you relative to curfews and consequences. And how are you supposed to make this work with your teenager when every time you set a curfew, they bust through it, and then you set a consequence and they don't care about that either. And now you are in a power struggle and pissing match over this curfew thing. And it's not working. If this sounds familiar to you, you are in the right place. I'm going to walk you through both my experience as a parent, my experience as a teen, and the research to help you find a workable middle ground with your teenager so that whether it's midnight, internet pause, whether it's midnight or another time that you are talking about with your teenager, you can lower conflict, increase connection, and actually use curfews to build respect as opposed to erode it. All right, welcome. Hi, Sabrina. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Allie Payne. I am a certified life coach, certified relationship systems coach. I have been helping parents of teens for the last 15 years to end the painful disconnection, emotional blow-ups, power struggles, pissing matches, and stressful silences to help you build a healthy relationship based on trust and respect. I am talking to you always from my experience as a very troubled teen with parents who loved me dearly and came from a very authoritarian style of parenting because that's what they knew. And having raised two boys who are now 19 and 21, I'm an aunt to 5 or 6 in real life and an aunt to many more online. And these are the kinds of topics that come up all of the time. So let's talk about curfew and consequences because nothing good can happen after midnight. So there's so many ways to come at this, and I was camping last night, so no, I don't have notes in front of me. I'm going with it. If you didn't catch it, yours truly might have been on Rachel Ray this past week. It's on my Facebook page, and I'll get it on my YouTube. It's such an incredible opportunity I'm so grateful for. That was 7 months in the making, so I'm just putting that little win out there to share with you. Okay. Curfews. I get parents ask me, what's an appropriate curfew time for a certain age? Well, I don't know. That's not up to me. There is no book. There's no book where you're like, okay, 15 years old, lives in a large community, okay, access to, right, the time says 11:30. Like there's no book like that, okay? This is about your relationship with your teenager and boundaries over expectations, which if you watched my IGTV or my YouTube from last week, you would understand really clearly that distinction. So if you're watching here on Instagram, hit the follow. If you're watching on YouTube, definitely subscribe. Thank you for being here. A boundary is what feels and builds respect for you and safety. Okay, but, huge but. A boundary does not build safety in a way that mitigates your insecurity or level of fear. Are you getting what I'm saying? An expectation, if you're talking about a curfew, an expectation is where you are using a curfew to control your teen. I'm not going to mince words. To control your teen. So you don't have to feel the fear, the inherent fear of parenting a teen who has access, so much more freedoms, or your own insecurity. That's an expectation. That's not a boundary. A boundary builds respect and emotional safety within the relationship. Okay? So curfew. Yes, curfew is intended to keep your child safe in some ways, but not necessarily. And what is the time? I don't know. A time for a curfew, I know I'm kind of bouncing all over the place already, camping brain, wow. There is no set time. That's up to you. That's where expectations and boundaries come in. Here's what I want you to understand. It's not the time that matters. Like, kids who have to be home by 11 are not better kids than kids that have to be home by midnight. Kids that have to be home by 10 are not safer. I'm going to say this one more time. Kids who have to be home by 10 p.m. are not safer than kids that have to be home by midnight. It's got nothing to do. So like, can we just like get over that right now? Curfews do not inherently keep your children safe. So the earlier you make it, they're not safer. And this whole thing that we grew up with, like nothing good happens after midnight, who even came with that saying? Can I ask who? Because I don't know who, but it's a load of crap. It's a big ball of BS. Yes, it is. Oh, indeed it is. Because if that were true, the next time you are out with your friends past midnight, well, obviously nothing good is happening then. I mean, you're obviously up to no good because nothing good happens after midnight. Okay. Big fat lie. So let's move past that. Okay, we're going to move past that. Okay, so what is an appropriate time for curfew? I don't know. That is up to you. Okay? Here is what curfew is actually about. Now, curfew, like a curfew, okay, was originally intended during war times to keep people alive. So, for instance, in World War II, okay, on the East Coast, I'm in Canada, but also on the West Coast, there was a curfew, which was a time at night in which everyone must be quiet, lights out, etc. And that was for their safety. So like my husband's grandmother lived on the East Coast in World War II with her husband. And they had to have all the lights out, like the street lights, the house lights, everything had to be out by 9:30 or 10 so that the enemy planes couldn't see where they were. So the city was dark. So the enemy planes or any enemy aerial or submarine or anything could not find them to create harm. That's where the curfew came from. Okay? So yeah, it can get messier, but not necessarily. Like from someone who finished drinking by the time she was 17, I would stay out till 1 or 2 in the morning, but I was just hanging out and talking. I wasn't doing anything. Literally most of the time I was sitting at our elementary school, a block and a half away from our house, hanging out with friends on the top of the playground set and just talking. So if that's an answer to your question, no, that's not necessarily. It's sometimes, but that is a worst case scenario thought. That you're trying to cut them off at the bend. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to get back into that. So curfew came from wartime, and it was intended to keep people safe because of the way the wars were fought. So it was a blackout time, literally a blackout time, so that people couldn't find key areas of the city and create harm. Okay, there you go. That's what a curfew was. I know I just lost half my followers there, but okay. That is not what curfew is now intended for. I understand you are intending for curfew to keep your teenagers safe. I got that. And the comment that I just got is that, but don't things escalate or get worse the later they go on? Sometimes. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But you're assuming that they will is what is in the way. Your story that says anything that happens after midnight is going to make things worse, that's a story. That's a story based on a whole lot of stuff. It's a story based on your upbringing. It's a story based on the stories that your parents had. It's a story based on maybe your experience as a teen. It's not necessarily true. There's kids that get in just as much trouble at school in the daytime than kids who do after midnight. So, meh. So curfew is intended to keep your child safe, okay? I understand. That's where it comes from. Here's where it gets in the way though. When you are using a curfew to lower your own level of anxiety and fear as a parent, that is not your teenager's problem. Your fear is not their fault. Now, you might have data and you might say, well, Allie, you don't know my teen. My teen's been out doing a whole load of stuff and they shouldn't be. And so I have every right to be afraid. Yes, you do. And I'm sorry that that's been your experience. You do have that right to feel afraid, and I'm sorry that you have reason to do so. I'm going to talk about first approaching the curfew, okay? So, curfew is an agreement with your teenager based on a boundary. A boundary is the place in which I love and respect myself, and I love and respect you. Now, sometimes you can't meet in the middle. Sometimes you just can't. Sometimes there's still a gap. Sometimes there's a chasm. That's how it works. But are you willing to be in the courageous, messy conversation to find that middle ground? So my parents would set curfews for me that were around midnight, I guess, like when I was 16, 17. Now, here's the difference. When I grew up, I could drive a car at 16 years old plus 30 days. So we could have a full driver's license at 16 years old plus 30 days. So I would often be the DD for my friends. I would walk over to my girlfriend's house. Her family would let her use the old station wagon, you know, the one with like the wood paneling on the outside. And then she would drive to leave the house to pick everybody up. We'd go to the party, but then I would choose not to drink because I was kind of over drinking by that time. That's what happens when you start when you're 13. And then I would drive everybody home safely, park the car in her driveway, leave the keys in her house, lock the door, and then I would walk back home. And then that was safe. I was not drinking, so it wouldn't have mattered. And I was making sure my friends were safe. I took that really personally. I made sure my friends were safe. If they got to be too much, then I would load them up in the car and lock them in the car and make sure they were safe. So my parents were always trying to set a curfew that kept me safe, but this is where it went awry. My parents set a curfew because of their fear, massive fear of stories they held in their brain that could happen to me, that I might do, based on what they believed about me, which weren't true. And so do you want to know what a pissing match? And that was insanity, because they would set a curfew and every single night I would call, every single time I would call and be like, can I stay out an hour later? Can I stay out? So now they already can't sleep till I get home. And now I'm calling, which maybe if they were asleep, now I woke them up, because now I'm calling to say, can I stay at, we're just at, and I would say whose house we were at. And it was generally one of my 4 or 5 friends who I grew up with since kindergarten. So they knew all the parents and they knew where I was for the most part. And I would always call to say, can I stay later? Because we're not doing anything wrong. We're just hanging out. And they're like, well, why can't you do it tomorrow? Why can't you do this in the morning? I'm like, because we're here right now. Because I was very athletic. I was in 2 to 3 sports a day. I was an A student. So I had lots of homework. And I'm like, because tomorrow I have 3 sports and then I'm babysitting. I babysat a lot as well. I'm here now, hanging out with them, having a good time, safe in this house. No. My parents would freak out. And so I broke curfew all the time. And then they would try and ground me. And then I would give them one of these. And then I'd be like, look, I am an award-winning athlete. I am an A student. I babysit at least 1 night a week and I make my own money. What is your effing problem? I have yet to be arrested. I don't do drugs, which I didn't. I tried kind of, but I didn't do drugs. I didn't, and I'm like, what is it going to take for you? What is it going to take for you to get over yourself and give me a little bit of credit for who I am and what I'm doing in this world? But you see, it was never about everything I did achieve or what I did do. It was about the probability of what I was or wasn't doing in their mind. And that's where they set the curfew from. So if that sounds familiar, I'm going to tell you to back up the bus. The other reason my parents set a curfew is because my mother, bless her, she loved me dearly. She still does. She has extreme anxiety, undiagnosed. And she said, I can't sleep when you're not in the house. So she used to set a curfew because she couldn't go to sleep till I was in the house. Now, as a mother who has gone through perimenopause and years, 8 years of not being able to sleep more than 3 hours a night, oh my goodness gracious, I can wildly appreciate insomnia. Like wildly appreciate. Oh my gosh, thank goodness that part of my life is I can now sleep. But I really, really do appreciate lack of sleep. But why was that my problem? That created more resentment in our relationship than anything else, because somehow I was responsible for her inability to sleep at night. And P.S., she didn't sleep if I was in the house either. My mother had an extraordinary difficult time sleeping, which is awful, having been through it. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. She has a number of other medical things going on that get in her way of sleeping, and it's terrible. It's truly terrible. And was that my problem as a teenager? Was that my problem? No, that never was my problem. But it was made to be my problem because she couldn't sleep if I wasn't in the house. So my curfew was set to try and manage her unmanaged medical issues that had very little to do with what I was doing. So please don't use that. That's not your teenager's problem. It's not their problem. If your curfew needs to be set based on what you feel is reasonable and probably a little fearful. I need you as a parent to check your story, your worst case scenarios running through your head. That's not your teenager's problem. Your fear is not their fault. Your fear is healthy, but it's a conversation with your teenager. Not a drop the gauntlet, I have this fear and so you need to behave in a way that takes care of my fear. Stop it. So I would always call to get my curfew later. I just wouldn't come home on time. Because here's what goes on in teenagers and adults for curfew, okay? Teenagers see curfew as an expression of independence, which their brain is wired to express greater and greater levels of independence, okay? They're wired for that. It is, in fact, necessary for their brain growth in the prefrontal cortex and in their frontal lobes. In order for your teenager's brain to fully develop, they need to begin to express greater levels of independence so their brain develops its own higher levels of critical analysis, risk-taking, independent decision-making. And when you circumvent that, you actually arrest their brain from developing that. So higher curfews are an expression of greater levels of independence for your teen. That's the number one thing. Number two, and this is where we get so tied up as parents and teens in this constant pissing match. Trust. Curfew for your teen is about trust. Do you trust me? That's what they're asking. That's not what you're hearing. I know that's not what you're hearing. They suck at expressing it. Teens are terrible at asking for it because they don't know how to say it. What they're saying is, do you trust me? And when they are arguing with you about a curfew, they're coming from a place of hurt and like really deep hurt. I'm trying to express this to you, very deep hurt that says, why don't you trust me? which is what I was saying to my parents, but I get straight A's. I'm never in trouble at school. I'm an award-winning athlete. I show up to everything on time. I hold 3 babysitting jobs. Why don't you trust me? And it's emotional. It became like a source of shame for me that nothing I did was good enough for my parents, and it showed up in their lack of trust for me in a curfew because they were running their own fear story that was so fueled by all the horrible what ifs and what they believed about me. Even though I had the data, like grades, sports, babysitting jobs, whatever, I had all of that to prove just maybe, I was an okay person. Okay, we're back. So I was arguing a later curfew from the perspective of trying to express the sliver of value that I saw in myself. Because remember, the teenage brain is fraught with insecurity. Self-esteem goes down 30%. I was already wildly performative. I was trying to earn love, earn approval. And curfew was another way I was doing it. Nothing worked. And so it reinforced to me that I was not trustworthy. I obviously wasn't smart enough, good enough, lovable enough to be trustworthy. And in fact, there was nothing I could do, apparently, to be trustworthy. I'm just going to tell you right now, if that is the message that you are sending to your teenager to abate your own fear, you're creating a much larger issue by not looking at yourself and doing whatever work you need to do to address your own level of insecurity and fear. You are passing that down to your teenager and telling them that they're not trustworthy. And if you don't trust them, here's what I need you to hear. They eventually will not trust themselves because they look to you to help define their worth as a human. And if curfew is a way that you are saying, I don't trust you, you are not trustworthy, they will internalize the message that says, I shouldn't trust myself. There must be something inherently wrong with me that can't be trusted. So be very careful. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a curfew. Not against curfew. I just want you to be clear why you're setting it. Why are you setting the curfew? Okay. So here's how to have a curfew conversation. Because for parents, this does often come from control, out of love to keep them safe. For teenagers, this is about exercising independence and wanting to feel trusted. So this is the messy tension and conversation about creating an agreement about a curfew. And if you're doing the curfew because that's what your parents did for you, and at this age it was 11, and at this age it was 11:30, and at this age it was 12, I need you to move past that. We don't live back there anymore. Your teenagehood is very different. So please move past that story. That it's not applicable anymore. Okay? Now, where I live now, our teenagers cannot drive independently until they are 17. So that's like a whole year of maturity. I could drive independently at 16 years plus 30 days. Our children now cannot drive independently until they are 17. And even then, our children can only have one other person in the vehicle that is a non-family member. So there are laws that were set that way where I live for safety. So you can't like pack 6 kids in a car, and like there was a lot of accidents. So it mitigates the danger. However, at 17, they can drive. So here's having this conversation is about this messiness of, I am telling you right now as a parent, you're required to be part of your child's process of building independence and growing trusting themselves while you build trust in them and deal with your own insecurity on your own. You are required to be part of that process, because when their brain is given higher and higher levels of trust, you're helping their brain to also work through critical analysis and that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not going to go over that. I've already done a whole article on the emergency plan, like how to develop an emergency plan. That is definitely a part of this curfew conversation. If you want that, it's on my website, alipayne.com, under blog, creating an emergency plan with your teen. If you can't find it, message me here, I'll send it to you. So I'm not going to go over, because that's a critical part of having the curfew, is you need to discuss, okay, let's talk about it. Where do you think you might go? What do you think might happen? What if things go wrong? What's your emergency plan out? You got to talk about that. Now, here's what doesn't work in the curfew. Asking your teenager to provide you all of the details so that you can make your decision. That 100% of the time won't work. Because it won't work, because the teenage brain does not make plans like that. The teenage brain is very fluid. They usually know a starting point, like who's going to be there and where they're going to start. They don't know the end point, the end destination, because their evening unfolds based on who snapped them and who's now available. And, oh, now we're going to go to this person's house. And, oh, this person's parents said we could go over. And so it unfolds kind of in the moment. It's very organic. So if you are setting a curfew while waiting only after your teenager gives you the whole plan, you're going to be waiting a whole long time. Because that is not how the teen brain works. It's not how they roll. It's very organic. This is about you leaning into trust. Now, having the conversation about curfew is, you can still have a hard line. You can have a hard line, but I'm still requesting that you willingly participate in the conversation with your teen about, have the emergency plan discussion, have the talk about how are you going to get home, what feels reasonable to you. And it probably won't be what they want either, and it won't be what you want, but it'll be something that helps you meet in the middle around respect, because that builds trust. And your teen probably won't constantly call you to come and to go later or whatever. Now, I know I'm sorry you guys, I'm not super clear. I'm jumping all over the map, and I apologize for that today. I'm sorry, I'm still hoping you find value in this. When I was a teen, I used to constantly call or just show up late because I resented my parents' curfew, why they created the curfew, and I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong most times. Most times. Yes, absolutely did some stupid stuff. But I didn't get in trouble with the police. I didn't get arrested. Yeah, I was still doing stupid stuff. But this whole thing that nothing can happen before midnight, that's BS. I was pissed drunk sometimes by 10:30. So we just need to get over that. I continued to push my parents and ignore their boundary because I felt disrespected, because I felt I got no credit for who I was and my current state, my current data. So the more I felt I got no credit for that, the more I said screw you to their curfew. So if that's happening with your teen is feeling like, come on, you're not giving me any credit for who I am, and you're making me responsible for all your fears. That's what I did. When we raised our teens, you're going to want to sit down for this. We didn't have a curfew. because I decided I absolutely did not want to raise my kids the way I was raised. And my kids are good kids. They're good kids. They are good people. They have good friends. They do well in school. I never have to hound them about homework. They do great. They're self-driven. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I've been talking about. Okay, Pam, I'll go further into detail for you. Okay, so with my kids, I didn't have a curfew. Here's what we said. When they were going out with friends and they couldn't drive, because remember, my kids could not independently drive until they were 17. So they needed a ride. So what we said is, if you need a ride from us, it has to be by 10 o'clock, period. Like, we're early to bed, up early people. So we said, if you need a ride from us, it has to be by 10 o'clock. If you can't get a ride home from someone else, I am coming to pick you up by 10 o'clock. And that frustrated them, but it worked. They were okay with it. Sometimes they could get a ride with someone else's parent to get home. Sometimes I had to go get them until they were 17. And that really upset them. Now, there's a few places of their friends around our house that are close enough to walk. And unfortunately, this is an entirely double standard, but young boys walking home alone at night is very different than young girls walking home alone at night. I hate that. I don't want it to be true, but it's true. So sometimes my kids would walk home if it was like one of the houses that's close to us, like 8 blocks, like well lit with street lamps. And my kids would text me. Here's my rule. They would text me when they left the house that said leaving now. And then they had to text me when they got in the door and it said home safe. So if I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and yes, my phone is in my room, but it's on full silence. I have no notifications on except for their numbers are on my emergency call. So if they call through, my phone would go off if they needed help and they were out. I could pick up my phone and it would say leaving now and home safe, and I could go back. That's it. I'm good. Because I know they were in their rooms. Home safe. Okay. So that's the rule that we played by. When they were 17, they were taking my car. Sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes they would take my car. And so we had discussions relative to that emergency plan conversation, which is a different article. It's already posted, about what they would do. What that meant around drinking, not drinking, the use of my car, what would happen if they were caught, if the police caught them, and no, I wouldn't come and bail them out, and yes, they would spend a night in jail, criminal records, like we talked about that kind of stuff. Briefly, don't make it a lecture. Do not make it a lecture. My kids actually chose not to drink, and they have really good friends, and I knew a lot of the places that they were at. And again, they would just text me where they were. And if they had my vehicle, the agreement was their location services, like on an Apple phone, like the family sharing of location, had to be on when they had my vehicle. Period. You want to drive my car, you keep the location services on. And they had no problem with that. I still had no curfew. Because I wanted my kids to know how much I trusted them, and I gave that trust. I did a whole conversation on trust is earned 2 weeks ago. If you haven't seen it, trust is not earned. That's actually BS. It's scientifically proven. Dr. Stephen Covey did the research. Trust is given. I chose to vulnerably reach out and say, here's my trust. You are worth me being vulnerable to give you my trust with my vehicle. Your location services have to be on. You still don't have a curfew. Now, here's what ended up happening. Because my kids had access to my car sometimes, they were someone else's safe ride home. And again, not because my kids were drinking at 17 and they were at a house, but they became someone else's safe ride home. So that put even more responsibility on them. Because you could only drive one other person. Remember, that's the law where I live. At 17, you can only have one non-family member in the vehicle. So they became someone else's safe ride home. And that in their brains helped their brain develop also that critical analysis, decision-making, independent thought that, wow, they're responsible for someone else. and getting them home safely. And most of their friends had to be home by 12:30. So my kids were home by 12 or 12:30 because everybody else had the curfew. And you know what? My kids never messed up on that. Never. And I said, I trust you. And they took that so seriously. And there is research that shows if you say, I trust you, I'm afraid, and this is hard for me, but I trust you, your teenager is more likely to be trustworthy, shocker, than if you say, oh no, you're going to have this curfew because this is all the things that can go wrong. And it's not you, it's all your friends. And it's not you, it's all your teenager is likely to lie and do sketchy and shady stuff. Now, here's the one argument about having your child on the road late at night. Is it more likely they may encounter a drunk driver? Yes, it is more likely that if your child is on the road driving, there may be drunk drivers on the road late at night. Yes, that is true. And so you may choose for them to not use your vehicle, and that is fine. And you may choose to say you can stay out till this time, but you won't be driving after this time. Great, that's fine. Just remember when you say to your teen, oh, it's not you I don't trust, it's everybody else out there, your teenager doesn't care. That's not what they hear. They hear you're using that as an excuse because you don't want to actually say you don't trust me. So you decide. This is 100% a trust building exercise, okay? And statistics and data have shown the more you say, I trust you, and then you discuss parameters. Like my son was, because bless him, my son was giving someone a ride home who lived half an hour away, and we're in a small community. And I'm like, that's an extra hour. By the time you go half an hour out, the time you go half an hour back, that's an extra hour. Like, dude. But at the same time, I had to look at my son's heart. Look at his heart. Look at his mentality. He's so invested in this person getting home safely and stewarding the fact he has a safe vehicle to drive them home that he was giving them a ride. Now that was extra gas. So I said, your friend's going to have to chip in for gas because that's an hour drive. So his friend started chipping in for gas, and then I was okay with it. But remember, before you go off on the deep end on your teen, you got to look at their reasoning and they're doing the right thing. And when they become someone's ride home, the trust level goes even higher. What if your child has driven your vehicle under the influence? If your child has driven your vehicle under the influence, it's a 100% all bets are off. You're done. You can't drive my vehicle. But here's the problem. Rebuilding trust has to have markers. It has to have moving markers. If your child has taken your vehicle, is driving under the influence, or was caught doing something outside of what the conversation that you've had, then they lose that privilege for a time. And if it's driving under the influence, then yeah, they absolutely lose privilege to your vehicle, 100%. But you've got to have markers about how they earn that back. Otherwise, it's the same as getting them to wear the red letter. From the adulteress in history, where if you were caught one time, you had to wear the adulteress sweater with the red letter on it, and there was no escaping that shame. You were shamed for that one choice for the rest of your friggin' life, and there was no redemption. I promise you, if you have a no redemption relationship, you also have no trust and no respect. So if your teenager has driven your vehicle under the influence, then there has to be a way for them to earn that back. They have to, let's say you let them drive the vehicle again after a certain time, say a month or two, but you say, now, if you're going to drive my vehicle, you have to be home earlier until we slowly build back that trust. No vaping in the vehicles, found vape in the car after he drove. Yeah, so then they lose that privilege. Period. They lose the privilege. But then you have to say, how can we rebuild this trust? I want to trust you. You are still trustworthy even though you made a bad choice. Do you understand the difference there? You are still trustworthy even though you made a bad choice. You made a bad choice. You are not bad. You made a bad choice. And you broke my trust on this one time. So you've lost the privilege for now. And what you're going to do, how are you going to rebuild that trust? You want to drive my car. No vaping in the car. What didn't you understand about the boundary the first time? Was I not clear about the boundary the first time? Because my boundary is the boundary. So they lose that privilege for, say, 30 days, right? Then if, you want to trust them, you have to come back to them and say, I want to trust you. Help me. How can we redo this agreement? I mean it, but I mean what I say. No vaping in the car. And that if I catch you a second time, then you're going to have to find a different way around that, where they have to take the bus, or they might have to pay for, because otherwise if you're not removing the privilege, then there's no benefit for them ever changing, period. There's no benefit for them changing. So, they're going to have to lose some privilege at some point. Like otherwise, so I understand what you're saying. I get what you're saying, but nothing's going to change because nothing's changing. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah. Okay, so I want to answer the question about, so that's rebuilding trust. Remember, curfew is a 100% a trust conversation. So there's a couple things I want to get to too. This is about care over control. So if your teenager, you set a curfew for say 11:30, and your teenager calls you at 11:30, they went to the movie with their friends, and they say, okay, my friends all want to go to IHOP. After the movie, we want to sit and just like hang and talk about the movie. Can we go to IHOP? Care over control. Your teenager has called you to say where they are and say where they want to go. Can they get a few points for that? And you say to them, sure, go to the IHOP. Let me know when you're there. And then, can we say, like, can you be home in an hour then? In an additional hour? And you're like, sure. Care over control. Not curfew for the sake of control. Care over control. Okay, you've got to be reasonable here. This is where I used to get so backed up and disrespect my parents because there was no reasoning with them. They had a story about how bad I was, all the bad things that were going to happen, and there was no reasoning with them. So I learned I wasn't trustworthy. That's what I ended up learning. I wasn't worthy of trust, and I needed to second guess myself. And I also needed to perform even harder and harder and harder into perfectionism to try and earn that trust, which I never got. I never got, like literally never. Okay, so that if they've broken your trust, this is it's not about going back to rebuilding trust. This is about what is trust to them. This is where you because curfew is about trust for them and control for you. And I know, I'm a parent, I get it. But we never once had a curfew with our teenagers. And they never, every single time they had our vehicle, location services were on. Every single time that they got home, they texted and said home safe. So I always knew what time they were home, and I knew if I could walk to the end of the hall and check their bedroom, they were home. That was our agreement. And they never broke it. Ever. And I had my phone on so that if there was an emergency, because this is critical that they have an emergency plan, so if something went wrong, they could still call me, and I would never be upset if they called me if something went wrong, because sometimes things go wrong. What if the car wouldn't start? How is that their fault? There was only one fender bender in my car in that whole thing, and it was not, by the way, after hours. It was on the way to sports in a parking lot. So this whole all bad things happen after midnight BS, it's just a load of crap. It's just an excuse for you to not deal with your own insecurity and fear. Now, here's the conversation about the curfew. And part of this is in the article that I just posted this week. Having the conversation is saying, okay, you want to go out with your friends. Again, your teenager is fluid. They don't know. So you talk to them about, what do you know about the plan? What do you think might unfold? When will they text you if the plan changes? Or because getting your teenager to text you every single time an additional person joins the party or their plan changes, that's not reasonable. Their plan literally changes once every 15 minutes to half an hour, but that doesn't mean they're doing it. So you could say instead that you check in with me like every hour and a half-ish or so. Just let me know where you're at. Asking your teenager to tell you, or setting a curfew based on, they have to know the whole plan, never gonna work. They have to know every single person that's gonna be there, never gonna work. So I'll send you that other article, or just look it up, alipayne.com on the blog. It's the emergency plan, I just posted it. That's another thing. Let me go back to the curfew though. So when you're setting the curfew, it's a conversation that says, okay, you wanna go out, what time do you think is appropriate to be home? What time do you think is reasonable based on what you're doing? Like if my kids are all going to someone's house who I know, come home at 2 a.m. I don't care, because I know where you are and I know they're there. If you're going to a bush party, okay, then we might need to have a different conversation. If you're going to this bush party, location services have to be on. If you're going to the bush party, then we might need to talk about an earlier curfew, because yes, things do tend to go off the rails the later and later of the bush party. So be open to what your teenager's asking you, what they know about what they're going to go do, and then what the curfew looks like. But the biggest thing I need you to understand is that a curfew is not intended to control. A curfew is an opportunity to build trust with your teen. And it is a function of their brain. Their brain is trying to do is build greater levels of independence, build their critical analysis to help them become a successful and independent adult. And if you think that circumventing that part of their brain by instituting greater levels of control is necessarily going to keep them safe, you are kidding yourself. Okay? You're kidding yourself. Because I did some pretty crazy crap by 11 o'clock at night and managed to crawl home sometimes at midnight, and it had nothing to do with my curfew. And then there's times where I was literally doing nothing wrong. Simply, it was a full moon night. It was literally like so bright out in the middle of the night, and I was doing nothing but sitting at the playground at the local elementary school, which was a block and a half from my house, talking with friends. That's it. We were just sitting there talking. No drinking, no drugs, no nothing. We were talking, and it was 1 or 2 in the morning, just being in awe of the world in the moonlight and the quiet of the world in this different perspective. That's all. And yet it was 2 in the morning. So please stop kidding yourself about that whole thing. Okay? The conversation is, here's what you think you want to go do. Here's what I want. Great. How do we meet in the middle? How do we discuss the messiness? I'm afraid about that. I'm not comfortable with that. Well, this is what I thought I was going to go do. I know you have to understand it is an unfolding plan. You can't control. I hope this has been helpful for you. Please look at this as care over control. This is a trust building exercise, and unless you are willing to step forward in vulnerability to help your teenager learn to build some trust, then this part of their brain is never going to develop. And you can have overarching agreements about when they can use the vehicle and when they can't. Have agreements that say gas money. We did that with our child's. Gas money. If you're going to go driving all over, then we're going to check what was the gas, take a picture of the gas tank before you leave. And then you're going to pay me for some of the gas when you get back. That's fair. That's totally fair. And that if there's damage to the vehicle, whether someone puked in the back, they were driving a friend home safely and their friend puked in the car, they have to clean the car. If there's a fender bender, they are going to pay for your deductible on your insurance. If they get pulled over and arrested, you will not rescue them. They will spend the night in jail. You can come up with these things in advance as known entities, so you don't need to project your fear on your teen via a curfew. And when your teenager breaks that trust, that doesn't mean they aren't trustworthy. It means they broke your trust on this one time. And there has to be markers for which they rebuild that trust, or it is a constant shame story for the rest of their life, and you don't need to bring it up again. So even if there was a consequence, the consequence is simply usually the removal of the privilege, period. It's the removal of the privilege of the car, or maybe they're grounded, and grounding for more than 7 days is ineffective, scientifically proven. They might need extra chores. Maybe they have to clean the car, right? They have to pay for the detailing of the car, and they've got to earn that money. That's a consequence. Then you stop talking about the transgression. Do not bring up that transgression over and over as a power move to lord it over their head, what a failure they are and why they're not trustworthy. Don't play that game. Do not play that game with your child. What you bring up is how they can earn the trust back. I'm afraid now it's a month later. What is it? Tell me what you understand went wrong the last time in your own words. Get them to explain that to you. Okay, here's my boundary around you taking my car, and here's the curfew. What do you understand of what I'm saying? How can I support you to enjoy this time safely and have fun within the boundary? How can I support you? And that leads sometimes to the emergency plan thing that you must talk about, okay? That you have to discuss with them. But these are the conversations to have, because if there's no room to ever build the trust back, you have a much bigger relationship issue, and it will show up in every single area of your relationship for the end of days, because they are trustworthy, even though they broke your trust at one point. Okay? So maybe the next time they only take your car for this amount of time. Maybe the next time they only take your car for this amount of time, and they slowly rebuild your trust. But you have to be willing to be vulnerable, because you don't get to sit back and go, I will decide when you are trustworthy. That's toxic. I already did that whole trust is earned thing. I'm not going to cover it. If you want those 2 articles, Trust is Earned and the emergency plan, message me here. I'm happy to send them to you. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this has been helpful for you in understanding ways to effectively use curfew as a boundary, not control, in your relationship with your teen, to help them build the part of their brain that is required to be an successful adult, so that they learn independent decision-making, critical analysis, risk assessment, and all of those necessary things. And it's going to be messy, and they're going to get it wrong, and you have the privilege of being in that journey with them as a mentor and someone who proves to them they are unconditionally loved, even though there are consequences to their actions. And when they get it right, you better say to them every single time, I'm so proud of you. Thank you for operating within that. I feel respected. I hope you had fun. And every time they get it right again, is this curfew working for you? Do we need to readjust? Do you feel trusted? How can I have you feel more trusted? Because if you're only talking about when they didn't get it right, we're right back to the beginning. These kids need to know that they're good people. They need to know that good people still make dumb choices, and that you love them anyway, even through a consequence. All right, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm here every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific time talking about all things parenting teens. If you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe. If you're on Instagram, give me a follow. This will be on my profile very quickly for you to share with all the other parents in your life who are parenting teens. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.